What if a single dawn could tip the scales of a nation's fate and send shockwaves through the world order? It is the morning of November 13th in Kiev. As the first rays of sun break through a dense, gray fog, the city stirs to life. But beneath the normalcy, military radios crackle with a torrent of alarming dispatches. Ukrainian positions are unraveling. In the city's war rooms, anxious commanders listen as frontline units slip away from their posts. Some vanish into the fog, others surrender quietly, and a few retreat in disarray. In Saporischia, raw footage reveals exhausted soldiers abandoning trenches at first light, some in hasty retreat, others moving with grim resolve through the aftermath of relentless shelling. The landscape is pockmarked with craters, twisted metal, and the charred remains of armored vehicles. The faces of the soldiers tell the story, eyes hollow, uniforms stained with mud, hands clutching empty magazines. Elsewhere, in Huliaipole, dozens emerge from splintered buildings, white cloths tied to their arms, a wordless admission of defeat. The symbolism of the white cloth is stark, reminiscent of the white flags historically used in conflicts from the Napoleonic Wars to the Second World War, signaling a desire to surrender and cease hostilities. Official statements call it a tactical regrouping, but the reality is starker. Defensive lines are crumbling. Ammunition has been depleted. Russian troops, masked by a heavy morning mist, surge forward almost unseen, overrunning the last fragments of resistance. As the front disintegrates, a second jolt lands. Kiev's government abruptly halts all peace negotiations, severing the final fragile thread of diplomacy. In a single morning, military defense dissolves, and the diplomatic window slams shut. The question cuts through the confusion. Is Ukraine losing its grip on the war, or is this the first forced step toward an unwanted peace? This is not merely another setback. It is a flashpoint that could redraw borders, fracture alliances, and upend the security of Europe and beyond. Overlook the speed and magnitude of these events, and you risk misjudging just how swiftly global realities can shift, jeopardizing safety, markets, and the trust that holds the West together. In the chaos of this pivotal morning, the fault lines of Ukraine's defenses and the world's assumptions are laid bare. What unfolds next will test every calculation, every nerve. For weeks, warning signs have flashed across Ukraine. Reports from the Donbass have become increasingly dire. Ammunition convoys ambushed, supply depots destroyed by long-range rockets, and units stretched thin across impossible distances. But this morning, November 13th, marks a new crisis. Before dawn, Ukrainian front lines in the south and east buckle beneath sustained Russian assaults. Today, under murky skies and thick fog, something gives way. Russian troops advance almost unseen, splitting the lines across several sectors. Ukrainian strongpoints, some held for months, are suddenly deserted. Video from Saporischia and Huliaipole shows squads surrendering, their faces drawn with exhaustion and defeat. The pace of collapse is reminiscent of the fall of France in 1940, when German armored divisions sliced through the Ardennes, bypassing the Maginot Line and forcing entire armies into retreat in a matter of days. Here, too, the defenders are caught off guard by rapid, coordinated assaults. On the ground, commanders describe soldiers at the edge of collapse. Ammunition is nearly gone, morale is threadbare. Drone systems, once vital, are down or jammed. The technological gap widens, leaving Ukrainian units nearly blind just as the attacks grow fiercer. Soldiers accustomed to relying on real-time drone feeds now huddle in bunkers, guessing at enemy movements. In Kiev, the political atmosphere turns raw. The government suspends peace talks, blaming stalled progress. Yet behind closed doors, officials admit international pressure is mounting, and the army is stretched to the breaking point. Some diplomats recall the final days of the Paris Peace Conference of 1919, when political infighting and fatigue led to hasty, imperfect decisions that set the stage for future conflicts. For NATO allies, these retreats are not just tactical stumbles, they are alarms. Every kilometer lost signals that the entire balance of power may be tipping. Moscow downplays its advances, insisting Ukraine's setbacks can be reversed. But the reality is grimmer. Analysts in Brussels and Washington pore over satellite images, noting the telltale signs of an army in crisis: abandoned vehicles, burning supply dumps, and streams of refugees moving westward. Each retreat, each abandoned trench, drags Ukraine closer to a decisive fracture. These failures are not isolated. They reveal a system under immense strain. If we miss the deeper trends beneath these headlines, we risk misunderstanding how a handful of tactical collapses could spiral into a strategic catastrophe, one that could ripple across Europe, destabilize alliances, and threaten security far beyond Ukraine's borders. But as the day unfolds, cracks deepen on every front. Events spiral rapidly, forcing leaders and soldiers alike to confront choices they cannot avoid. The situation evokes echoes of the Korean War's early months, when United Nations forces were pushed back to the Busan perimeter, forced to decide between holding a shrinking line or risking annihilation. This is not just a single disastrous day at the front. It marks the culmination of years of mounting strain. To grasp why Ukraine's defenses are unraveling, we must look beneath the surface. Since late summer of 2024, Ukrainian troops have clung to a mismatched line, crumbling Soviet-era bunkers patched with hastily dug trenches and sandbags. These defenses depend on drones for eyes, smart artillery for muscle, and air power for breathing room, but each of these lifelines has frayed as the war drags on. Consider the example of the famed Sievierodonetsk defense in 2022. Then, Ukrainian units held out for weeks against superior Russian firepower, using drones and Western-supplied artillery to even the odds. But now, the supply of precision munitions has dwindled, and drone losses have mounted. The defenders in Saporischia lack the tools their predecessors had, and the enemy has adapted to their tactics. Recently, Russian forces have struck with unnerving precision. They jam communications, target ammunition stockpiles, and choke off supply routes, each move tightening the noose. These are not just tactical blows. They eat away at the backbone of Ukraine's defense, undermining the system from within. In one chilling incident, a Ukrainian brigade found its entire drone fleet rendered useless by a single Russian electronic warfare system, leaving them blind to an impending attack. The human toll is staggering. Many frontline brigades now fight at a third of their intended strength. Mobilization has slowed to a crawl, leaving hollowed-out units to absorb relentless attacks, while fresh recruits and vital reinforcements trickle in far too slowly. In some battalions, veteran fighters are forced to train new conscripts even as the shells fall, echoing the desperate measures seen in Stalingrad during the Second World War. Meanwhile, NATO has quietly shifted gears. Rather than delivering urgent firepower, Western allies are betting on long-term upgrades, training, new weapons platforms, and slow logistical reforms. Someday, this might pay off. But for soldiers trapped at the front today, these promises offer little comfort as critical gaps widen. An infantryman in Huliaipole put it bluntly: "They tell us help is coming, but we need it now, not in a year." Russia senses these weaknesses and presses every advantage. Their playbook is brutal: thick fog at dawn, precision glide bombs, drone swarms, and constant psychological warfare. Morale cracks as defenders face confusion, exhaustion, and the creeping sense that relief is not coming. On encrypted channels, Russian commanders mock Ukrainian pleas for support, a tactic reminiscent of the psychological operations used in the siege of Sarajevo. Pressure now builds not just on the battlefield, but in Kiev's corridors of power. Peace talks have collapsed. Support among international partners wavers. The Ukrainian public, battered by years of war, grows weary and skeptical, asking how much more sacrifice is possible. The mood recalls Britain in 1942 after the fall of Singapore, a sense of national shock and the realization that victory is far from certain. All these pressures converge into a grim truth. Today's retreats are not isolated incidents. They expose a deeper crisis, a web of military, technological, and political frailties woven over countless months. This unraveling matters far beyond Ukraine. If left unaddressed, these same cracks could threaten the stability and security Europe has relied on for generations. The memory of the Balkan conflicts of the 1990s, where local wars quickly spilled over into regional crises, should serve as a cautionary tale. As the front lines buckle, the world must reckon with what comes next. The consequences of this moment will ripple across borders, shaping policies and alliances for years to come. Every decision now ripples far beyond the battlefield. Each choice Ukraine and its allies make could alter the fate of the region, and perhaps the world itself. The calculus is brutal. Hold and risk annihilation, retreat and risk collapse. The coming hours teeter on a knife's edge. In one scenario, Russian momentum endures. If Ukrainian reinforcements cannot arrive, the collapse will accelerate. More towns in the regions of Saporischia and Donetsk may fall before nightfall, triggering a domino effect that could unravel defenses across the south and east. This scenario is not without precedent. Recall the fall of Mosul to ISIS in 2014, when a rapid collapse of one unit led to the disintegration of an entire front. Another path is tactical consolidation. Ukrainian commanders might order a pullback, shrinking exposed front lines to form denser, stronger defenses, even at the cost of territory. This maneuver is a gamble. It only works if supply routes and ammunition deliveries stabilize. Otherwise, the withdrawal risks becoming a slow-motion retreat rather than a reset. The Soviets used similar tactics in 1941, conducting fighting withdrawals to save their armies at the expense of vast swathes of territory. A third scenario unfolds not on the battlefield, but in the corridors of power. With peace talks frozen and no diplomatic exits in sight, pressure from Western capitals could intensify. Kiev faces an impossible dilemma: accept further military losses or resist allies demanding negotiations, risking splits in critical international support and sparking public outrage at home. In the Vietnam War, the South Vietnamese government faced similar pressures, torn between the reality on the ground and the expectations of U.S. backers. The fourth pathway is a full Russian breakthrough. If Moscow seizes the moment, exploiting exhausted Ukrainian lines, they could take control of key corridors. This would dramatically shift the regional balance, forcing NATO to question its commitments and recalibrate its strategy. The fall of Crimea in 2014 demonstrated how quickly territorial changes can reshape strategic calculations. The most dangerous scenario is uncontrolled escalation. Desperate Ukrainian counterattacks or rushed air deployments could provoke overwhelming Russian retaliation, spiraling the conflict in unpredictable and potentially catastrophic directions. In the Yom Kippur War of 1973, last-ditch offensives nearly dragged superpowers into direct confrontation. None of these outcomes remain contained at the front. Each threatens to send shockwaves across Europe, deepening rifts within the European Union, igniting sudden spikes in energy prices, and pushing Ukrainian soldiers to the psychological brink. For many, this is a tipping point, where morale may shatter, and with it, the resilience of an entire nation. Never have the risks been higher. Territorial loss, diplomatic fracture, market chaos, and a collapse in willpower now threaten to cascade beyond Ukraine's borders, destabilizing not just a nation, but the global order itself. The European energy crisis of 2022, triggered by the first phase of the war, showed how quickly conflict can ripple through global markets. As the world watches, uncertainty reigns. Every scenario brings new dangers, and the next moves could define the conflict and the future for years to come. What happens in the next 24 hours may set the tone for the next decade. In moments of crisis, clarity is power. This morning's events demand we extract hard lessons, ones leaders, analysts, and citizens cannot afford to ignore. First, Ukraine's dependence on sophisticated, yet scarce Western technology has bred a critical short-term weakness. As new equipment arrives, older defensive lines erode, and the gulf between Western promises and on-the-ground realities grows. This leaves exposed flanks and gaps that adversaries can, and do, exploit. In the Spanish Civil War, the Republican side relied on foreign aid that was often delayed or insufficient, leading to similar vulnerabilities. Second, Russia's agile, tech-empowered combat teams, supported by advanced electronic warfare, have widened the battlefield gap. These units are not only swift but ruthless, disrupting Ukrainian communications and neutralizing drone advantages with unnerving precision. The use of electronic warfare is not new. During the Gulf War, coalition forces paralyzed Iraqi command and control in similar fashion. Third, ammunition shortages and inadequate air defenses have turned tactical withdrawals into dangerous chain reactions. When supplies dwindle and skies are hostile, even elite Ukrainian units must abandon positions. Each lost outpost threatens to spark a wider unraveling. During the Battle of the Bulge in 1944, Allied forces had to abandon key positions due to supply shortages, risking the collapse of the entire front. The political atmosphere in Kiev now shows visible cracks. Military setbacks stir public unease and embolden skeptics at home and abroad. Decision-makers confront impossible choices, negotiating from a position of eroding leverage. With peace talks suspended, every battlefield misstep carries greater risk, and the margin for error shrinks. The Suez Crisis of 1956 offers a historical parallel, where political miscalculations led to an abrupt loss of influence for Western powers. For NATO and its Western allies, Ukraine's setbacks cut deeper than optics. Each retreat tests the alliance's credibility and collective resolve. The question is urgent. Will partners invest decisively or watch the front and shared trust unravel? The Hungarian Revolution of 1956 revealed the perils of Western indecision, with tragic consequences for those who place their hopes in outside intervention. Energy and financial markets are already feeling tremors. Every shift in territorial control ripples through commodity prices, undermines investor confidence, and shakes Europe's sense of security. What unfolds today in southern and eastern Ukraine is being felt in boardrooms and government offices from London to Washington. The oil shocks of the 1970s and the financial panic of 2008 both show how geopolitics and markets are inseparably linked. Ultimately, Ukraine's fate may depend on a handful of fortified positions, last bastions that can endure only with immediate and robust support. Without it, even these strongholds may fall. The defense of Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge stands as a reminder. Sometimes the fate of a nation hinges on a single stubborn stand. The core lesson: hesitation and half measures will only deepen the crisis and quicken the collapse. The Munich Agreement of 1938, with its policy of appeasement, taught the world how dangerous half measures can be when facing a determined adversary. To overlook these truths is to risk repeating strategic blunders, eroding Western unity, and emboldening adversaries far beyond these borders. The lessons of history are clear, but only if we are willing to heed them. As the world watches this turning point, the next moves from both sides will shape more than just military outcomes. What happens next could redefine the balance of power for years to come. The Berlin airlift of 1948 showed how decisive, united action could counter crises and shape the future. So where do we go from here? What concrete steps can Ukraine and its allies take in the face of mounting catastrophe? First, prioritize immediate resupply. Air bridges and supply corridors must be established to deliver ammunition, medical aid, and drones to the front. Western nations could deploy civilian cargo aircraft under military escort, as seen in the Berlin airlift, to break any siege or blockade. Second, reinforce critical positions. Identify and fortify key strongholds with layered defenses, minefields, anti-drone systems, and mobile reserves ready to counterattack. If resources are limited, focus on urban centers and transportation hubs that can serve as anchors for a new defensive line. Third, accelerate training and integration of fresh recruits. Short, intensive courses in urban combat, first aid, and drone operation can rapidly transform conscripts into effective fighters. Mobile training teams, drawn from NATO veterans, could be embedded with frontline units. Fourth, launch a coordinated information campaign, both to bolster morale at home and to counter Russian propaganda. Highlight acts of heroism, successful defenses, and international support. During the Battle of Britain, uplifting broadcasts and speeches helped sustain the national spirit in the darkest days. Fifth, maintain open channels with international partners. Diplomacy must continue, even if formal talks are suspended. Quiet back-channel communications can lay the groundwork for future negotiations or humanitarian corridors. Finally, plan for contingencies. Prepare evacuation routes for civilians, establish medical triage points, and ensure that local leaders have the authority to make rapid decisions. The evacuation of Dunkirk in 1940 was only possible because of pre-existing contingency plans and decentralized command. As the crisis deepens, citizens everywhere have a role to play. Stay informed, demand accountability from leaders, and support humanitarian efforts. In World War II, civilian resolve and resourcefulness often made the difference between disaster and survival. In a single morning, history can pivot. Will you notice before the world is changed? The tremors of November 13th, 2025, roll out from Ukraine's collapsing front lines. Defenses do not merely shift, they rupture, exposing a web of weaknesses far more alarming than any headline can convey. Soldiers surrender, others retreat, and the clamor of diplomacy is replaced by a chilling silence. This is not just a lost battle, it is a system pushed past its breaking point. Exhausted fighters, dwindling ammunition, and sudden technology failures converge as diplomatic options freeze. With sunrise, the stakes surge, not only for Ukraine, but for everyone watching from afar. The risks are unmistakable. To look away is to forfeit the chance to grasp the forces reshaping our reality. The consequences ripple outward. European security stands on a knife's edge. Global energy markets tremble, and the trust-binding Western allies faces its toughest trial in years. Our personal safety, economic future, and shared reputation are all bound to these unfolding events. Most never realize when history turns the page. What happens now in Ukraine is not just a local collapse. It is a beacon warning anyone who cares about preparedness and critical thought. Staying alert is the only way to understand what comes next, and perhaps to help shape it. Let the pace of events be your alarm. Complacency is the surest path to being blindsided. In moments like these, vigilance is not optional. It is essential. As this crisis unfolds, being informed is not passive. It is your duty. The world is watching. Do not look away.